Welcome to my channel. If you're watching this video, you are probably interested in becoming a fisheries observer. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys all about what fisheries observers do and kind of what the job entails. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cece. If you clicked on this video, I'm assuming that you are considering becoming a fisheries observer. If you watched my other video about entry-level fisheries and wildlife jobs, you'll have heard me mention fisheries observing. In this video, I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about what the job entails, what the duties are, differences between the different fisheries, and so on and so forth, because I know when I first started, there wasn't a ton of information. Hopefully this video will answer some of the questions that you have. I know when I started I had a lot of questions. It's one of those jobs that's like very hard to conceptualize until you're doing it, unfortunately. The same stands true once you've done it and you're trying to describe it to other people. Like, it's a whole other world. It is a very cool experience. If you're considering becoming a fisheries observer, I'm not going to say it's a job that comes with no cons. There's definitely a lot of cons, but there's definitely a ton of pros. Today, hopefully, I can fit a whole bunch of information about the pros, the cons, the different fisheries, the different types of work, and the different contracting companies. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the different types of work that different observers do in different fisheries, and my knowledge mostly comes from the work that I did in those specific fisheries. I'll touch base on the other ones, but I won't have as much information to share because firsthand I didn't experience it myself. That being said, I'm a US-based fisheries observer. There are fisheries observers all over the world: New Zealand, Australia, the UK, Canada. Today's video is mostly going to be based on the US fisheries observer work, just because that's where my experience comes from, so it's kind of what I can talk to best. I have worked in a couple different fisheries. I was personally a fisheries observer for 5 years, from 2015 till 2020 when COVID hit. So the information that I'm going to be sharing is relevant to that period of time. Things are ever changing, duties are changing as the fisheries are changing, which is a really exciting thing about the job. However, take everything I say with a grain of salt because things are evolving. Usually I would say for the better, which is awesome. Let's get started. So what is a fisheries observer? Fisheries observers, you are contracted through a contracting company, and there's quite a few of them, to go out onto commercial fishing vessels and monitor their catch and report that back to the government. That way, the fishing industry is sort of kept accountable for the impact that they're having and what they're collecting. That's like the easy way to describe it. Most all of the fisheries that you'll go to will train you for the job. Usually if it's a 3-week training, you'll go to wherever the training is. You'll have to get yourself there. I'll give the example of Alaska because that's the one I worked in the most, the North Pacific Groundfish and Halibut Observer Program. They changed the name while I was there, and then they changed it back, I'm pretty sure. The North Pacific Program in the Bering Sea. And that was my first program that I started with, and it was a great one to start with. I will say the North Pacific, the Bering Sea fishery, is probably the best managed fishery in the world, so it sets a really good standard. If you're somebody like me who's interested in fisheries policy and interested in management and moving forward one day in that realm, going out and being a fisheries observer is a fantastic way to, one, just see how different stakeholders are involved in the fishery, the fishermen, the government. It's cool to see firsthand these fishing operations, right? Because I had it in my mind something similar to that documentary Seaspiracy. I hate that documentary. It's just full of falsifications and they're making it real dramatic. It's not like that. It's really strictly managed, which is great. At least the full coverage one. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll get back to that. Save that in your brain. So going back to the beginning, I interviewed to be a fisheries observer. I got hired, and actually I interviewed for the West Coast and for Alaska, and I was kind of torn between going to the West Coast and going to Alaska. The reason I ultimately chose Alaska was, one, for the adventure. So glad I did it. There's lots of adventure. But also, Alaska, the housing is all provided. I mean, you're living on a ship for weeks on end. So, I mean, that's your housing. But also when you are in Seattle training, your housing is provided at that time too, and you're getting paid. So Alaska was just a great opportunity for me to kind of stack cash, and that's where I was right out of like college-ish years. I needed a job where I could get adventure, get field experience, and make some money. And the West Coast program, that program differs in the sense that your trips aren't as long. You're not going out on ships for weeks at a time. So I'm pretty sure housing is provided in the West Coast fishery during your training, at least up north. However, in San Diego, the Southern California one, I don't know if housing is provided, so don't quote me on that one. But I know up in the Northwest one that is out of Oregon, that training, I'm pretty sure they provide housing during the training. After the training, you're assigned to a port town, and then you have to rent your own place, and you go out to sea for shorter trips. In Alaska, you're sent away and you're working for pretty much at least around 90 days. That's a lot of money, but it's also a lot of time spent away. That being said, you go to Seattle, train for 3 weeks, housing is provided. If you complete your training, it's not the easiest training in the world. They take it pretty seriously, but it's an incredible training. You're learning all about how to use a dichotomous key, how to ID these fish, how to dissect these fish, remove otoliths. It's a lot of hands-on learning. It can be a little intense, but it's awesome. And the great thing is that you are really in a community vibe during this time. You're getting to know your other observer trainees, and it's everybody comes together to do their homework at night, and you're all kind of like afraid together. You're living in the house with the priors. Priors are observers who have already gone through it, seen some stuff, seen some things, put in some time. And then newbies are like first years who are wide-eyed and bushy and so excited and they smell clean, you know? And then priors just kind of have like a glazed over look in their eye. I'm a prior. But yeah, so you complete that and then you're sent up usually to Dutch Harbor. Here, even if you choose Alaska as your program, there's a difference in the type of fishery that you're in Alaska. So there can be the full coverage fishery, meaning big trawling vessels that have observers 100% of the time. There's also smaller catcher vessels that don't process their fish that fall under that 100% coverage, and those also have observers 100% of the time, meaning there's always going to be an observer monitoring their efforts at that time. So usually those observers will get sent to Dutch Harbor because it's the biggest fishing port. That's where I spent a majority of my time. It's really incredible. There are also plants, what they call plants in Dutch Harbor, meaning those vessels that are just catching fish are bringing those fish back to land to a plant, and then that plant is then processing the catch. So there is also observers stationed at the plant. So if you're somebody that gets seasick and you find that out after you've taken on the job, sometimes that can be an option for you to get put at a plant so that you're still getting field experience. You know, you've put in this time, this training, and you're not having to suffer from seasickness, because that'd be real. Knock on, I never experienced seasickness. Some people don't. The job I have now, I'm in a plane. I get plane sick. Well, a little bit, not really anymore. Yeah, there's medications that you can take if you get seasick. Dramamine can be your best friend if that's the case. When you go to Dutch Harbor and you get assigned onto this ship, right, or this big old vessel, it can be a little daunting. I'm not gonna lie. My first vessel, I believe I was the only female in a crew of 55 men. And we went out to sea for 30 days, came back for about 6 hours. There was a female cook at that time, so there was 2 of us. And then we went out for another 30 days and then went into a different tiny port for about 4 hours and then went out for another 27 days. And that was my first experience. When you're on those bigger ships though, those processing ships, because operations are happening 24 hours a day, you will have a second observer with you. One person working 12 hours, another person working 12 hours. So, you know, you have another scientist out there, which is pretty nice to kind of like, you know, high five as you go on and off shift. If you're a new observer like I was, it was great because I could ask them lots of questions. One of you will be a lead observer, meaning that person, again, has experience, and they're the ones doing a lot of data checking. Not to say that the second observer can't also be doing data checking. You really should. So data, what you doing out there? The data that you're collecting, basically imagine a huge, I'm talking tons and tons and tons of fish gets brought up, right? This big net's been out in the water for hours. They haul it up on board. If it's a bottom fishing vessel, meaning ground fish, and they're trawling the bottom of the ocean for fish, then they're gonna bring that catch up. And the way that it was working towards the end of my observer career was halibut up in Alaska. It's like a super protected species, so you're on deck a little bit sorting out halibut. And then after that, they dump all the fish into a tank, and then the fish are being pushed through a factory. Now you are going to do a quick math calculation based on how dirty the catch looked, how much species diversity was in there. Did they mostly only catch their target fish, or is there a bunch of other stuff in there that you're gonna have to sort out and work with? Based off that information, how big the catch was, how much you think you can sample, there's a goal in mind here. You're gonna do a quick math formula, and that's gonna tell you when you need to go down into the factory and be at the head of where the fish are coming out, so it's not sorted at all. And you're going to take a sample of fish, like big baskets of fish, and you're going to, you're in full Grundon gear. You're gonna dig through there, you're gonna ID everything, you're going to look at your list of priorities. Is it sex length? Is it stomach samples? Are there special projects that NOAA has assigned? It's just, you go through this list of job duties basically, and then you're recording all of that onto a data sheet, you're recording weights and all of that. When you're done with that, you're gonna rinse yourself off, go upstairs, go to your computer and enter all of that into a database that then gets sent back to NOAA back in Seattle, and they are going to process that information and monitor the fishery that way. And then you just rinse and repeat, keep doing that over and over again. Special cases will pop up that cause a little bit of variation, but during your training you're sort of taught how to handle all of that. Same goes for if you're in a midwater trawler, or if you're out on a vessel that doesn't have a factory, like just a catcher vessel. You'd same thing, bring them up, they're gonna dump it all on deck, and you're gonna take your samples before it goes down into a tank. If you're on a long line in Alaska, good luck. I didn't have to do that. They were like sending people out there. It's pretty hard to get certified to be a long line lead, but right as I was leaving, they started this long line lead observer training in Seattle that your contractor could send you to go do, and I got sent to go do it. And luckily my last contract I was not used as a long liner, because I don't want to go on a long line. You're outside a lot and it's cold in Alaska, and I'd be cold. When you're in the factory, it's warmer. It's beautiful when it's cold, I'm not gonna lie. Like when ice is all over the ship and they're chipping ice and it's snowing while you're out on deck, like it's pretty cool. And Dutch Harbor is beautiful when it's covered in snow. It is a very cool experience. It's one that looks great on your resume, great to get that like hands-on work experience, and it's something that I definitely recommend people try. If you have more questions about the Alaska program specifically, feel free to reach out to me. That's the Alaska one. Touched on the West Coast a little bit. If you do Alaska and you do well and you come back and your data looks good, you'll do a debrief, which is where you talk to the government about your data, and they basically say good job. And if you got the good job, then you are now qualified to go do a special West Coast program called HAKE, which I did do. I loved it. It's different than the West Coast that I spoke about earlier, in the sense that you are still assigned to a ship, like you're living on the ship, and the trips are about 30 to 45 days, and it usually only happens in the spring and the fall. I loved HAKE because we were usually off the coast of Washington and Oregon, so close enough to still kind of see mountains on the horizon, and sometimes get cell phone service so that I could like talk to people. In the hake fishery, I feel like the fishermen too are just like a little bit more chilled out. They have cell phone service, they can kind of talk to their loved ones a little bit more. It's not as stressful of a fishery. The vibe is just a little different. It's a really, really deep water fishery. So if there's bycatch on that, you are seeing all of the bycatch, right? I've seen sharks, I've seen everything. I mean, it's just, there are some proper aliens down deep in the ocean, and in the hake fishery, that's when you're seeing them. It is so cool. And I know you're probably thinking like, oh my god, I don't know every fish in the sea, like how am I supposed to ID that? You don't have to know it all. NOAA will send you out with this fat manual that tells you how to deal with every possible situation you could possibly deal with out there. On top of that, you can, go and send them a message if you have any questions. I will say they don't work on Saturday and Sunday, so if it be 2 a.m. on a Saturday, you're probably not going to get a response for a little while, but Your in-season advisor is someone who's at a computer back in Seattle, will get back to you eventually. You also have a prior out there, or a lead, or whomever out there, another observer to ask questions to. And you are given a identification guide. It has a dichotomous key, so basically you just run through, is it a fish? Yes. Does it have fins? Yes. How many fins? Yes. And it'll lead you, if you answer the questions correctly, it should lead you to your fish. I had one case where a fisherman came to me and they were like, hey Cece, what's this fish? And they were like, we don't know, we've never seen it. And I was like, I got this, guys. I'll tell you. So then they're watching me and I go to ID this fish and I'm like, oh fuck, I don't know. It wasn't coming up. I was like, oh no, I'm bad at my job. So I was like, I don't know. And I took pictures of it, sent it off. People in Seattle were like, we don't know. We don't know either. We've never seen this fish. It got sent to University of Washington in Seattle, and their ichthyologist, whoever, their fish guy, he ID'd it, and it was some deep bluefin, small, cute little fish that just has so rarely been seen. If you Google the name, it didn't even pop up with anything. That was pretty cool. Love it. So you do honestly get to see some really cool stuff in this field. So far I've talked about quite a few pros to this job. I will get into some cons really fast just because this video is running long and there's so much information to share. So pros are good field experience, beautiful views, see some really radical stuff. Field experience is really transferable. It looks great on your resume. Another big pro is that, it's a paying job. When you're fresh out of college, you don't really have experience other than a bachelor's of science degree with calculus and statistics, because that's the minimum requirements, okay? If you have that, you can do this job and walk away and be very qualified for lots of other things. I think it compensates well considering the fact that you don't have a lot of experience going into it is good, because you're not paying for food when you're out there. If you're on land, you're getting a per diem rate as well from your company, meaning they're giving you extra money for food. And if you're on a boat, then you don't have to pay for food. You don't have to pay for rent unless you're renting somewhere back home while you're gone for 3 months. But I wasn't doing that. So you stack a bunch of cash. That money goes pretty far. And then I know in Alaska, at least, every 90-ish days, you get a pay raise. 90 sea days, you get a pay raise. So that 130, it climbs quickly. And 130 is for Alaska. I know people on the East Coast, they start out at a way higher rate. I tell them 130 and they're like, whoa, that's awful. The living conditions in Alaska and just the beauty of seeing Alaska were pretty good payment for me as well. So yeah, cons are you're gone for a very long time. Communication is sketchy at best. It's getting better. I've seen boats get better about Wi-Fi and letting observers even use the Wi-Fi, but I always just tell all my friends and family and loved ones, hey, I am probably not going to get to talk to you for 90 days. That way expectations are low. You can be pleasantly surprised. Even when you're in town in Dutch Harbor, most cell phones don't work. I know that AT&T worked in spots on the island when I was up there. You can also pay to get GCI pay card, a little SIM card thingy to use when you're in town. You're not in town much, so usually that's not really worth it unless you're a plant observer who's in town all the time. I know for the company I worked for, which was Alaskan Observers Inc., AOI, you had to buy a phone card too and use that to call off island. So yeah, you're pretty much gone when you're out at sea. Two, it can be a little challenging living and working with fishermen. On my very first vessel ever, I was like, hi, bright-eyed, smiley, outgoing. It wears pretty quickly on you when you're the only female and you've got lots of males around you all the time. And I will say in Alaska, this is to quote my captain, my first captain, because I got kind of, just guys saying uncomfortable things to me, and I told my captain about it. And he was like, you need to become a beep, beep, beep. He was like, these are bottom of the barrel humans. These are straight out of prison guys. They're not nice guys, so you need to toughen up and So my way of dealing with that was I basically just like didn't make eye contact with anybody. I didn't really make friends with people. I know some observers can do that. Some female observers can become buddy-buddy with everybody, but like for me, it was best to keep everybody at an arm's distance. And then after I learned that you're pretty normal and nice, not going to take advantage of my kindness, then maybe I'll talk to you a little bit more, but it can be really exhausting. This isn't a normal work environment. You kind of have to learn to do whatever it takes for you to kind of make it through the day. And for me, that was just like, I can't do small talk all the time with everybody because it gets a little draining. I'm also really introverted, which works out well for me being isolated on a boat for weeks at a time. It doesn't work great in the sense that like constantly having people around me and not having space to myself can be hard, which leads me to my next thing. So living conditions, right? Like where you sleep at night. 99% of the time I shared a room. I was on one catcher vessel where I had my own room. But of my like, I don't know how many boats I was on, 13 maybe, in just Alaska. Yeah, I think I always shared a room. So usually if you're sharing a room, you are sharing a room with the other observer, which is great. 12-hour shifts, swap out. But there were definitely cases where I shared a bunk in a room that other people slept in. So the deck boss, the cook was the worst one because the cook doesn't work set hours. I was working 12 hours and my partner was working 12 hours and I knew that he wasn't going to be in the room at that time. The cook was coming in and out all night long, even when I was sleeping. On the catcher vessels, when you're sharing a bunk and a bunk and a bunk and a bunk with the deck boss and the deck hand and blah, 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 at least most of the time everybody's up at the same time doing your thing. Usually on those catcher vessels there's only one bathroom, so you kind of have to like plan accordingly with that. That can be hard. It can also be hard too from a dietary standpoint. You're eating what you're given. Unless you're gonna pack a whole bunch of vitamins and food and stuff with you to take out there. I know a lot of observers put on a lot of weight because you're just like eating this fried food all the time. I put on 15 pounds when I first started. That is something to be aware of. There's not usually a gym. A few really big boats will have a gym, but then again, like you're out on the Bering Sea, you're moving, so it can be a little hard to use the gym even when you have it. But you know, some people will do pull-ups on deck. They'll do push-ups in their room. If you're dedicated, you can do it. You can squat fish. I remember one time I was waiting for a sample and I was like, you know, like squatting baskets of fish or something, and the deck boss saw me do it, and so he was mocking me with a cod, you know, like doing bicep curls with a cod, and I'm like, man, fuck you, I'm trying to be cute. Anyway, yeah, so that's the Alaska, the West Coast. I also did Hawaii, which was super something. The Hawaii Observer, or the Hawaii Fishery, that is tuna, sometimes swordfish. It's a long line one, so again, they're setting out these long lines with thousands of hooks on them, and they're baiting them and sending them out to sea for a couple hours and then bringing them back in to see if they got tuna, if they got swordfish, and what else they got. So that fishery, that was a pretty cool experience. You're living in Hawaii, which is amazing. Boats weren't as amazing. I didn't hack it. I couldn't last. Bed bugs. I can't deal with bed bugs. I slept in a trash bag, my own choice, for about 2 weeks because bed bugs hatched. Or I was sleeping like in like a cabinet space in the galley on the ground, and they were in the galley carpet, and they penetrated my sleeping bag, and I was like, oh, can't do it. So I wrapped my sleeping bag in a trash bag, and then I just slept in a trash bag. I put my pillow, taped that up in a trash bag, and it's so you're sleeping during the day there because they're fishing at night. If you're sleeping, like that's one where you're the only observer, and operations go as long as they go. I think ours was like 16 hours a day on average, so that's like how long you're usually out on deck, not to mention paperwork time, not to mention setting of the nets time and counting the hooks that come back time. That fishery, your job duties are just IDing usually the fish and taking lengths, just recording basically what's out there. That fishery is something I haven't talked about. That's a partial coverage fishery, meaning like in Alaska, I said the bigger boats will have observers 100% of the time. In Hawaii, it's partial coverage. This is also true in Alaska. There are partial coverage companies in Alaska, or boats in Alaska, and that means that those boats are smaller. Usually those boats are smaller, and they are partially managed, partially covered. Only certain times, certain trips that they do will require an observer on board. When I was in Hawaii, it's partial coverage, meaning they don't always have an observer on board, meaning there wasn't necessarily room for me, dedicated workspace such that there was in Alaska. So it just means shifting some things around and the crew adapting. My crew in Hawaii, that's a whole nother thing. The Hawaii Fisheries is this whole nother thing. It can be cool in theory. If you have specific questions about Hawaii, you're gonna have to let me know in the comments because there's too much. This video is too long for me to keep talking about. I'm just gonna really quickly wrap this up. So there's Hawaii, there's the West Coast, north, south, there's West Coast as in the Hague, there's Alaska, there's partial and full coverage in Alaska, there's partial coverage out in the Northeast, there's fisheries observing down in Florida and the Gulf, a few different ones. All of these different fisheries have different contracting companies, and sometimes they have multiple contracting companies. When I was in Hawaii, Tech Sea was the contracting company. I know that has changed since then because constantly bids from the government are going up for these contracts, and so it changes every couple years along with the benefits and the pay. But in Alaska, I worked briefly for Saltwater and for Alaskan Observing Inc. My sister worked in Alaska doing shellfish observing, so like the deadliest catch boats. My sister did that with Saltwater. There's also another company up there called AIS. AIS is partial coverage in Alaska, and they also do the southeast and the northeast stuff, as well as Fathom, East, West, EWT. And like I said, the pay varies. I think of all of them that I've seen, West Coast was kind of the lowest, then Alaska, then Hawaii, then the Northeast, and I don't remember. I think the Southeast was actually pretty low too. The Southeast is unique in the sense that, in Hawaii too, it wasn't a daily rate, it was an hourly rate. So when you're making that hourly rate, you have to think about, if you're interviewing for this, right, and they're saying it's going to be an hourly rate, ask them, how is my overtime calculated? Because you're working 12 hours a day, usually 7 days a week, right? When you're deployed. Are you getting paid overtime after 8 hours in one day? So those 12 hours? Or are you working for a set rate until you reach 40 hours for the week? And then anything after that, is that overtime? You know, also, when does the week start? Does it start on a Wednesday? Does it start on a Sunday? Because when you get deployed, that will play into your paycheck. You start in the middle of a week and you work only technically 38 hours that week or whatever, and then the next week starts. It could be a while before you reached that overtime period. So it can be a little complicated. Questions to ask when it comes to hourly pay with observing is how all of that works, other things to consider, things that you want to pack. I'll make a video on packing too because that can be pretty unique. Anyway, this video is getting super long. Let me know down below if you want me to talk less and answer specific questions. Fisheries observing is a whole thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's a necessary thing. It is getting kind of taken away by electronic monitoring. That's another conversation. If you have more questions about fisheries observing and you don't want to listen to me talk in another video, another resource I know that is out there is a podcast called The Observer Station, started by some priors. That's an awesome resource. Shout out to The Observer Station. They also have an Instagram. They post cute, funny things. So Alaska operates, the fishery runs year round. There's always a need for observers. Usually the highest time is in January for A season, in May, June for B season. In December, November, the work dissipates a little bit because it's mostly just longliners out there, but there's still work that exists. Some people love it, some people hate it. I liked it. I loved it until I didn't. I did it for a long time though. My sister did, I think she did too, and she was good. It's not one of those fields that you have to put a ton of time in to really reap the benefits on your resume. I just did it for so long because I would go and stack this cash, and then I would go and travel the world and have so much fun and spend all of my money. And then I would know that I could come right back to Alaska and have my housing paid for and my food paid for and just stack cash again. And I just did that over and over and over again. If you have questions about specific contracting companies up in Alaska too, they vary a little bit with pay and all of that stuff. You can ask me directly, but this video is way too long. Hope that this was helpful for you. Good luck on your journey. Go save the fish. I wish you the best. Luck. Bye.